My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guests on this special one-hour program are the minority leaders of the House and the Senate, Representative Mike Chippendale and Senator Jessica de la Cruz. Welcome back, both of you, to State of the State.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Dick.
We have seen you before when you were candidates, and we're happy to see you back. I want to get the Republican Minority Party view today about what's going on in the General Assembly. But first of all, Senator de la Cruz, I want you to talk to us about what happened at the recent fundraiser you held. I think it was last week.
Actually, yeah, it'll be a week on Tuesday. It was, I had so many people show up, an outpouring of support. I feel so grateful. Not only did people drive from long distances to be there, but so I appreciate them immensely for their support. The protests, unfortunately, the protesters did intimidate some guests. As I was sharing with some other individuals, there was one lady who was crying at our fundraiser, and I didn't see her, but the people who were in the receiving line saw her, and she was just, felt scared and intimidated. Other individuals talked about being shouldered and, slurs, calling them certain vulgar names. So that's not appropriate. I'm all for their First Amendment rights to free speech, and if they disagree with my stance, they're perfectly within their rights to say so. But when you resort to intimidation, that's not appropriate.
Yeah, it's kind of, to me, when you cross the line, when you start actually physically coming in contact with people or trying to physically prevent them from attending something. It's the same thing with the protests that happen on campus. If you could be pro-Palestinian, but if you try to block Jewish students from going to class and so forth, that's not the First Amendment. That's not a peaceful protest.
Right.
And about how many protesters were there, roughly?
Some people say anywhere from 70 to 100, but I'm not exactly sure because I didn't stick around to find out. I had to get into the venue, greet my guests. And I would also point out that while my side of the restaurant, the venue was packed from end to end, the restaurant was completely empty. Mm-hmm. And so the waitresses, the bartender, the hostess, nobody was paid that night because they didn't have any tips because people were too intimidated to pull into the driveway because they were blocking the entrance. The police presence, I knew that some protesters would come, so I alerted the police ahead of time, but they had to dispatch more police officers because the number was just much bigger than we had anticipated. So I just felt bad. And my point was to them that, you are for the working families, they say, but yet what they did was hurt the working families because, they suffered. So hopefully I left a big enough tip to help everybody out.
Thank you for that, I guess, on behalf of the staff. So Governor Dan McKee has proposed a budget this year, coming fiscal year, for $14 billion plus. The state budget has exploded ever since the spending of the Biden administration during the COVID pandemic, where they poured scads of money into the state coffers. Some of that money remains unspent even today, and it's being used actually now on projects that have nothing to do with public health. Leader Chippendale, the House Finance Committee is really the body that comes up with the budget. What is your view of the governor's proposal?
I think every year the governor's budget is going to be something that reflects whatever that governor's priorities are. I think there's less of an incumbency on the governor to ensure that the budget approach is a good approach. And it becomes more of, unfortunately, a political, ideological vehicle for any governor, where they can make their points and then hand it off to the House, knowing full well that the House will have to work with the Senate and come up with a responsible budget that uses the taxpayers' monies appropriately. That said, there have been there are some unique elements to this year's budget, as we mentioned earlier, and I don't know if you want to get into that now, but we can if you would.
I want to wait.
Yeah, so we'll hold off on that.
I know you're going.
Yeah, on that particular element.
Yeah.
But it seemed like it was a 50,000-foot budget rather than a really detailed budget. His address, the State of the State address, it may have been Leader Dela Cruz who coined the phrase, it was a filibuster. Was that you?
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Because frankly, all it was introductions of people in the room and these pregnant applause lines that were inserted artificially into his speech that people, quite frankly, didn't get and never applauded. It was an awkward delivery. It was an awkward speech, and it had zero substance to it whatsoever.
Maybe that's why the TV cameras were excluded from
Probably.
the first time I can remember. Now, Leader De La Cruz, advocacy groups are already complaining that they need more money because the demand for their services is growing. And it seems that almost axiomatic that government spending, once they begin spending on a certain project or activity, they can never turn the spigot down. And can the government spending be reduced, or has $14 billion kind of become the baseline?
It can be, and it should be. You know, RIPEC, the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council, frequently puts out reports. And one of the reports that they put out, essentially what they said was that Rhode Island doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem. And Republicans have been saying that for a long time. You know, we can look to other states, and, you know, it's not an apples to apples comparison. So a lot of times we look at New Hampshire and we say, okay, New Hampshire has relatively the same number of people, even though they have more. You know, they're small like us, they're a little bit bigger, but they have better roads, more people, and they have a biannual budget. I think the last budget that they passed, and don't quote me on this, might be a little bit more, was $11 billion, and that's biannually. And Rhode Island, our budget continues to grow and grow and grow, and we don't get much for our money. And then I would point out that New Hampshire doesn't have a sales tax, doesn't have an income tax. Of course, they have tolls, but they put those tolls in a restricted receipt account, which we don't do. So they're responsible, good stewards of the taxpayer dollars, which, you know, we are not in this state. And I would say we, because we're in government, but I wouldn't put the blame, you know, on the minority party here.
Leader Chippendale mentioned that the House and the Senate work together, but my question for you is, the Constitution says that spending and revenue bills have to originate in the House. So I think it's Chairman Abney and the Finance Committee, they really work on the budget. I guess my question is, does the Senate Finance Committee work with them, or do they come up with a parallel budget, or do they wait to see what the House has come up with, and then the Senate Finance Committee looks at that?
From my understanding, when I've talked to members of the Senate Finance Committee, of course the budget goes to the House, but they do work with the Senate. I would say there are things that the House wants that the Senate can grant, and so they work in tandem to make sure that everybody gets what they want, and that means you know, working together as a team. So
the House passes it first, then it goes over to the Senate. The Senate looks at if they can't come to an agreement, or they're different, they have to sit in committee, joint committee, to come up with the final.
We've never, in the time that I've been there, we've never had a grand committee where both sides would sit down.
But that would be the mechanism in that case?
You know, it's the House's authority and power to appropriate, and I think the work throughout the year where the Senate identifies priorities that they have and works with the House leadership to ensure that those priorities are funded adequately, that's the art of the deal that happens behind in the office, you know, meetings with doors closed and all the papers laid out on the table. That happens fairly well before the budget is put before us to vote on. So I've never seen that happen. There was one year, however, and I can't tell you the year, it was maybe 2014 or so, where there was an impasse between the Senate and the House on matters outside of the budget. And the House simply passed the budget as is, and we adjourned and sort of left the Senate holding the bag. And that led to an extraordinary session in the fall where we had to pass a budget. It was a mess. Yeah. So whenever there's an impasse like that over politics, it doesn't benefit the people of the state. So we like to see it work within that process. Yeah. Let the House work the budget through the process with the Senate, and hopefully it will go smoothly.
Yeah, I seem to remember that. Was that during Raimondo?
It was during Raimondo's time, yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about the governor's proposal for a minute. A talking point in his State of the State address was that his budget proposal includes an amendment to enact a ban on so-called assault weapons. This lot of the legislators have told me this appears to be an end run around the legislative process by the executive branch. The gun control advocates have tried for years to pass an assault weapons ban, as you both know, without success, although they have chipped away at Article 1, Section 22 of the Rhode Island Constitution, which says simply, citizens of the state have a right to own and carry a weapon. Now, they have passed various bills, I call it chipping away, but things like the red flag law, the DV law, the Safe Schools Act, and last year, of course, we had the Safe Storage Act. I guess my question would be, Leader Chippendale, we have groups like the Moms Demanding Action and the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence. They have succeeded in passing these little increments, and now this year appears to be the year they're going all out. We had on this program Representative Jason Knight, who said a bill banning assault weapons, including semi-automatic shotguns of a certain type, would be introduced in case the governor's amendment gets removed in the budget. This morning I checked, and no firearms assault weapon ban bill has been introduced as of this morning. My question is very plain. Will a ban on so-called military-style weapons happen this year?
I would like to hope that it will not. As you point out, it was inserted in the budget in an extremely cynical and clearly political move by the governor. The governor knows full well that of the people who have expressed interest in running for that office in 2026, one of the key issues of many of these people has been an assault weapons ban. So in a political attempt to try to seize that issue, he's injected it into the budget. But what the governor fails to calculate into his political projection here is that a budget needs a 2/3 vote, whereas a bill needs a simple majority. So in the House, that would mean 38 people can pass a bill. Yep. That's not the case with the budget. You need 50 people to pass a budget. So he's now made it more difficult. What has he also done? He's put every straight-minded Democrat who thinks clearly and who supports the Second Amendment in a very difficult spot, because now they have to ask themselves, will I support a budget that takes my rights away? And if they don't support that budget, there will be political hell to pay with their leadership, because it is expected that as a member of the Democratic caucus, you will vote for the budget. And almost universally, that's how it happens. So to insert that into the budget, I think, was, again, purely political, cynical, and I believe it will get stripped out. So that will then go back to the independent bill, or the standalone bill, that you had that very lengthy conversation with Representative Knight about. Yeah,
I guess Senator De La Cruz, President Ruggiero, I believe, has joined House Speaker Sicarchi this year in saying that he would support an assault weapons ban from the Senate side. Do you think a ban is inevitable this year?
I hope not. I wish I had, a magic, I don't know what they call them.
Crystal ball.
Crystal ball,
yeah.
Thank you. But I hope not. I heard the governor talk about how if he had 10 Rhode Islanders at the table, that 6 of them would be Democrats and 4 of them would be Republicans, right? A little more in his state of the state. And I hope that he considers those, 40% of Rhode Islanders who believe in protecting their Second Amendment rights. But I would also point out that the legislation, if it's the same piece of legislation that was submitted in years prior, it's a radical piece of legislation. It will not ban assault weapons. It will ban almost every single firearm that is in production. So if you have, semi-automatic handgun, that's going to be legal. If you have a revolver, you can keep that. But it's going to ban almost every firearm. So it is a radical piece of legislation.
Further, if I may interject here. When these bills pass, as you pointed out, you find them offensive to Article 1, Section 22. When these bills pass, there is almost immediately lawsuits filed, whether they're in federal courts or state courts. Sometimes they're happening in parallel. There are still several happening right now. Each of those cases are being defended by the Attorney General's office, and they're being paid for by you, me, and everyone watching this TV show. So I want people at home to realize that it has been the adopted approach of the legislative leadership to say, well, that's what the courts are for. We're going to pass this because our members want this and let the courts do their job. Yeah. Meanwhile, they're stripping us of our ability to defend ourselves and our families, and frankly, our state and our nation by doing this. And it's costing the taxpayers a tremendous amount of money, while at the same time we have several federal circuit courts who have already ruled on these measures, whether it's capacity, safe storage, assault weapons, whatever the issue is. And they've ruled so differently in each of these cases because the individual laws they're ruling on are different, but they're all the same topic matter, that we feel very confident that this will eventually be taken up by the Supreme Court of the United States of America. My position is this: if you believe that this is a good initiative, just look at the groundwork. Let's not waste taxpayer money defending something that the SCOTUS is going to soon tell us is constitutional or not. If it's constitutional, then you can try to pass it legislatively. If it's unconstitutional, then you're going to save the taxpayers of the state a lot of money defending it in court. We spend millions of taxpayer dollars defending against bills like this, laws like this, every single year. But the approach, unfortunately, from the legislative leadership is that of maintaining their power in their chamber, and sometimes that means they have to promise people certain pieces of candy. And this is a piece of candy that a good number of my ridiculous colleagues really want.
I asked Representative Knight on what basis would a ban on assault weapons be included as an amendment, and he said the justification would be that, I haven't read the amendment, frankly, the amendment includes a sales tax exemption on some of the items used to store firearms. So that's the connection to...
It's a workaround.
It's a workaround? Okay, that was my question. Yeah. It's just a workaround.
Yeah.
So sales tax exemption on storage?
Yeah, on safe storage devices that was passed last year. Now he says, okay, this includes a sales tax exemption on those items. Okay. Therefore, it's appropriate.
And for the folks at home, a state budget is an appropriation vehicle. It has to have something to do with appropriating state funds. So you can't put social policy that strips civil rights from someone in a budget. It doesn't belong there. But if you attach a funding mechanism, as you point out, with this sales tax ploy, they now feel they can put it into the budget because it does have a funding element to it. Again, cynical, political, silly.
The way that I look at it is like, okay, if you're giving a sales tax, whatever, write-off for individuals buying a safe, well, how much does the safe cost? I mean, it doesn't cost that much, right? Unless you're buying a drum, right? Yeah. And then if you're banning the firearms that you're going to put in the safe, well, then what good is the safe if you can't buy the firearm? Okay? But then I think
that's too logical.
I know, I'm sorry. I should just stop right there with the logic. But what is even more infuriating, maybe not even more, but equally infuriating, is that the governor is taking this opportunity to be an activist and not being a good governor for Rhode Island. What he's done is, and he knows, and maybe he doesn't know, if he doesn't know, then he needs to take a civics course. He does not legislate. He doesn't get to submit legislation. If he thinks there's a piece of legislation that is good and on its merits, then he needs to seek a sponsor in the House and the Senate. He doesn't get to pass legislation. He's the executive of the state. He executes the laws in which the legislature passes.
Yeah, if he doesn't like a bill that comes to his desk, he can veto it.
Absolutely.
So, if I remember right, the assault weapon ban that was introduced last year called for a registry of firearms that were already being included, including possibly licensing even those that own them. Is there a state law now that prohibits the state from having a database or registry? Yeah,
I think it's 114741. Don't quote me on the last part, but it essentially says that no firearms nor owners of firearms shall ever be registered. So whatever solution is put forward would have to strike that entire section from law, which would further be offensive to Article 1, Section 22. But yes, and the reason why that was put into state law is because history is replete with examples of what happens once a tyrannical government identifies who has firearms and where they are. They just simply go and get them, and then bad things happen. And again, history is replete with examples of how this works, which is why legislators wiser than us put this into place a long time ago, so that they will not ever find out who we are, where we are, and what we have. It's none of their business. It's a constitutionally protected, God-given right.
Well, again, as you say, this has ultimately got to be decided at the federal level by the United States Supreme Court. I guess that would be the law of the land at that point. But are either of you aware that last week President Trump issued an executive order to the new Attorney General, Pam Bondi, about a 30-day review of all of the firearms regulations that have been issued during the Biden administration, including the court cases in which the federal government is either a friend of the court or a plaintiff? Did you heard that?
Yes,
hear it,
yeah, and it does pertain just to the federal regulations that have been created, so it wouldn't touch on the laws that we've passed in the state. However, it could impact us in the sense where if they're reviewing court decisions and anything was deemed to be inappropriate there, we could have hope for some relief there.
Sure.
But you know, I think it's important, Dick, for this statement to be made. We have some of the strictest, and when I say some of, I think the 4th or 5th strictest gun laws in the United States of America. Mm-hmm. We also have one of the lowest rates of firearm violence in the state of Rhode Island anywhere else. They are not seeking to address a problem we have. They are allowing U.S. veterans to sleep on the street while pallet villages sit empty, and they're focusing on these ceremonies on assault weapons bans, which won't solve a problem because the problem doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, they're not very often used in these, even in the gang wars or the drug wars.
Oh, it's handguns that the gangbangers are using.
Yeah. Let's move on to another topic. I want to go into something else that's in the budget that was kind of interesting. The governor is calling for a tax on electric vehicles in the form of I call it a punitive registration fee, annual registration fee. Mm-hmm. Strikes me as kind of ironic where the federal government is offering tax incentives for people to buy EVs, and now the state government is coming along saying, well, we're losing state sales revenue from gasoline tax, therefore we're going to punitively tax these things. What do you say about that? I mean, is that either one of you want to address the irony there?
I don't.
I have strong feelings.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'll follow you.
Hold on to your seat. I support the governor's proposal here 100%. And the reason is very clear. We pay for maintenance and repairs of our roads and bridges through a portion of the gasoline tax, which is collected by consumers who have internal combustion engines, and we consume gasoline. Owners of electric vehicles consume no gasoline. However, their vehicles weigh between 30 and 40% more on average to their internal combustion counterparts. So they, based on the DOT and the governor's own logic that trucks do more damage to our roads and bridges because they're heavier, they are doing more disproportionate damage to our roads than their internal combustion counterparts. Yes, there should be an assessment put on there, and you won't often hear a Republican asking for an increased fee, but in this case, they use the same roads, they do more damage, and they aren't paying the tax. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think an assessment is 100% appropriate. In fact, I had legislation which I've not put in because he already addressed it in the budget.
Oh. What do you think?
Well, I don't feel as strongly, but I do. I've said, you know, on Gene's show with Leader Chippendale, is I understand the intent behind it, and so you have these electric vehicles that are incredibly heavy, that cause a lot more damage to the roads, but yet they're not contributing. But I would say the other option, instead of paying a $150 fee, is a mileage tax. And do you really want to know how much, you know, you're driving and then give that to the government and say, well, this is how many miles I drove in 2025?
But they could track it. Every vehicle today has tracking on it.
Yeah, you can, but do you want them to?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that's the alternative, is to say everybody has to pay. You know, and you could make it a sliding scale so the heavier vehicles pay more. There's a lot of ways to get at it. But, you know, the whole ironic thing is the gasoline tax, as you both know, and I hope most of our audience realize, it's not earmarked for road maintenance. In fact, 10 cents of every gallon goes to RIPTA as a subsidy. And now people who never set foot on a RIPTA bus are paying to subsidize RIPTA, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
9.75.
And I think 1
So
cent
you'd
goes to BHDDH, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, so this tax is like going into this black hole, and it's being allocated out in all different directions. People don't realize that, and you know we've already started into pothole season, as some of you know. I hit a couple today, and I'm saying, oh boy, and we're not really into the spring yet, but it just seems to me it's ironic that we incentivize people to do a certain behavior, and then we turn around and say, well, wait, that behavior has an implication on the revenues that the state is going to get, or the federal government, whatever government bureaucracy we're talking about, and we got to penalize people for it. Anyway, speaking of penalties, as you know, a federal court ruled that the toll gantries installed by Governor Raimondo to ostensibly pay for her road building program by tolling out-of-state trucks has been ruled unconstitutional. Governor McKee wants to turn the gantries back on and toll all trucks. I guess my question would be, when these gantries went up, a lot of critics, I think a fair number of them were Republicans, predicted that the next step would be to toll cars. Are they correct? Is that really where we're headed?
I think so. I mean, kind of like what you just pointed out. You know, the government says get an electric vehicle, and then all of a sudden they're taxing you. So now we're just going to toll trucks. But when they find themselves in a bind, they're going to say, well, we're in a really tough spot. We're going to have to pass, legislation allowing us to tax vehicles. And again, I'm just going to point to that RIPEC report. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And so I think that's what we need to look at is, where are we spending too much? I think we need our own Doge here in Rhode Island. So kind of segueing into an inspector general, find out where's the.
We're going to get to that.
Okay, all right. So I won't go there.
You guys are jumping ahead on me.
Sorry.
What do you think about this tolling of?
So
we're going to toll cars next.
I think it would be exceptionally difficult for us to get to the point where cars would be tolled, and I'll tell you why. And this is largely due to Republicans and others who put up such a strong fight, as you pointed out, when this bill was being debated in 2016. We got a provision put into the law that states that the people of the state would have to vote to toll cars. So
it would be a referendum item.
It would have to be a referendum based on the bill. Now, two things could happen to toll cars. One, a legislator can put a bill in that eliminates that section requiring the referendum, thus ending their political career and anyone who votes for its political career. Or they could put it to the people through the referendum, at which point I feel fairly comfortable saying the people would say no. Mm-hmm. So to forcefully impose a car toll, I think would be the death of anyone's political time in office. But that does not get rid of the overarching issue, which is we leveraged these tolls in 2016 with Garvey bonds, which are essentially revenue bonds, saying that we want $300 million so we can work on our roads now. Mm-hmm. And as these tolls trickle in over the next 30 years, we're going to pay this bond back with interest. Yep. Well, again, as the Republicans predicted, I believe Leader Filippi used the exact phrase, this is a violation of the Dormant Commerce Clause, which is what the federal court said it was. We don't have a source to pay for that yet now, right? We've got the $300 million in bonds. We're using it, if we haven't used it all, and we have no source to pay for it. So I think that the governor will absolutely turn them on. How it will look, I don't know. Will it be gantries just on our fringes, on the Mass border, the Connecticut border, on 95, on 146, on 195? I don't know. What relief will we give Rhode Island truckers who now could be paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars a day to bring their products and services to the people of our state? that will have an impact. And to the people who poo-poo that as, oh, it's just a marginal, well, pretty soon the margins start to accumulate, and this is a state filled with margins.
Yeah.
We can't afford any more margins, and the trucking companies can't afford to bear the cost of the added increase, so they will pass it on to the consumer. It's economics 101, and that our government fails to understand these basic economic principles, I think is very frustrating for Republicans like us who think less is more in a lot of these cases. So it'll be interesting to see how this does shape out. There are no winners in it, though. There are no winners.
Well, the gantry's up, as you know, on 95 and 295 now. So I call them strategic points where truckers, would have to pass through them. And it would be very easy to just say, okay, we turn on the cars next, and we'll see more and more people with their dark license plate covers on the back.
Where can I buy that? I'm just kidding.
Oh, you can buy them at a store. In fact, that's an interesting thing. There is, right now on the state law, there's an $85 fine for obscuring your license plate.
Even if it's a clear cover, that's still an $85 fine.
No.
Yes.
The dark cover.
Anything on your list. If you have a frame that says I bought it at Ford such and such, they can find it. It's a ridiculous law.
Yeah, but it was interesting because I asked the chief of police one day, I was standing at a public meeting, and I asked him, several cars went through with those plates, and I said to him, why aren't you guys stopping these cars? He said, but because I have to start in back of the police station handing out tickets. Everybody, all the police officers have them already.
A lot of people do.
Yeah. So anyway, I want to go on to the I-95. I am going to get to the Inspector General, but I want to talk about the Washington Bridge, the Interstate 195. It's a complete fiasco. I think most people recognize that Governor McKee and DOT Director Alidi seem to be pulling a blanket over the facts, or certainly not transparent, which may go back to, this whole problem might go back to the way the bridge was designed in the 1960s. It was really kind of a Rube Goldberg thing to start with, but in fact, it wasn't even a state bridge inspector that found the problem, as you probably are aware. And I'd like the audience to be aware that it was a young engineer working for a company that was retained to check the work of a paint job of another state contractor. That job was not being done by the state either. And this young engineer noticed the problem, went back and researched, and he's the one that actually caused the thing to become public and shut down the bridge. I guess my question is, will we ever learn what really happened, and will either the House or the Senate Oversight Committees hold public hearing on this, either one of you think?
We have a hearing coming up on Thursday, but it's almost a year to the day. So have we been having oversight? No. Should we? Absolutely. I do find it challenging, the first time in committee where we have questions, but nobody's able to answer them. So we would ask the DOT questions, and they'd have to get back to us. I never heard back from them, but so we have a lot of unanswered questions. And then on top of that, I use myself as an example. You can give me data and I can sift through it and I can understand it, but I'm not in the construction business. So, one of my colleagues was, and he was able to talk, ask questions about the concrete and the pins inside the concrete and how it could, erode over time and snap. And so there's a lot of information to digest, but as I'm reading more and more documentation, I find that it seems like as the government, our state already knew a long time ago that the bridge was unsafe. And I was talking to one individual, an engineer, who said, the proper way to test is to have 3 tractor trailers on each side crossing at, the very same time to see the stress on the bridge. And, that would determine whether or not the bridge is safe. So I have to go on what these engineers are saying. He said, if the earthquake that happened in Maine happened in Rhode Island, in that vicinity, he said, I don't know that the bridge could sustain the weight that was on it, and maybe possibly could have. But we don't know those things. So it's a very serious issue. And we just don't have a lot of answers.
Yeah, serious implications, obviously, for the East Bay.
Yeah.
Well, I think the implications are for the entire state. You know, we have folks on the West Bay who have doctors, or they take their children to a school on the other side of the state. You know, there's scholastic sports, so the Ponegantza team may have to go to East Providence or something for a ball game. So yeah, it impacts everyone. I think the most important thing, Dick, is that we focus on getting the bridge reconstructed affordably as possible, safely, and so that it will last a good long time. I think, as you pointed out, it was a peculiar design. The cantilever design is unique. It is employed throughout the world, but it's over the ocean, and it's exposed to corrosive salt on the road as well as the water, and that we weren't paying close enough attention over the years, and this didn't happen overnight, that we weren't paying close enough attention over the years, I think is an indictment of the level of emphasis placed on maintaining the infrastructure we already have. You know, it's not sexy for a politician to go to a ribbon cutting for a maintenance project, you know. It is sexy to go to opening something new. So that's unfortunately where a lot of the effort, money, and priorities are placed, rather than the boring maintenance requirements and responsibilities that we have as a state. This whole thing is frankly, it's dealt a huge blow to the economy of our state, and I don't know that it'll be fixed anytime soon.
The question I would raise is, I would assume that the other side of the bridge that's being used for both-way traffic is designed the same way.
It is.
So the question is, are we going to do one side and then all of a sudden we have to go back and do the other side? This is going to go on for another 5 years?
Well, the plan is to replace both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it is the same design, although it was refurbed recently.
I would hope so, with the traffic going both ways.
Oh yeah, you know, it's seeing all the traffic on that one side now. Yeah, it's the whole thing has to come down.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic, don't you think, that the state is suing the people the companies that we expect to do the demolition and then do the reconstruction? I mean, isn't that, again, another irony? The way out of this is to sue the people that did this, and I don't understand some of the logic here, but.
Yeah, and you had said, had asked, do you think we'll ever find out, who's at fault? I honestly don't think that we will, because they'll blame somebody who's already 6 feet under, who's already passed away, and they'll throw their hands up and say, well, there's nothing we can do about it now. And not to try to segue into another topic here, but I think an inspector general would be, I think he would be able to, or she be able to help us, again, figure out where was the waste, where was the fraud, where was the abuse, because obviously there was.
Yeah. So, perfect segue, because I was getting ready to get on this. I know both of you spoke on Gene Valicenti's program about this in favor of a state inspector general. So my first question is, Leader Chippendale, how would this differ from the auditor general we already have as a creature of the legislature? How would this differ from the auditor general?
Certainly. So right now we have an auditor general who reports to the JCLS, which is the Joint Committee on Legislative Services. That auditor general responds to the Speaker of the House. And if we want something to be audited or a performance audit done, a financial or performance audit, the Speaker will order the Auditor General office to do that. An independent inspector general would not only have all of the capabilities and the authority of an auditor general, but he will also have a lot of referral authority, he or she, as an attorney general would for criminal matters, and they would be independent. So they don't answer to the speaker, whoever the speaker is, or the governor, whoever the governor is, nor should they. That's why it should be. Or the Senate president. Or the Senate president, exactly. And it's not an indictment of the three people who are in those positions now. It's just, that's not independent. When your job relies on someone who can dictate what you will and will not investigate, that's not independence. So an independent inspector general would have the ability to, through substantiated whistleblowing, through just their own auditing, their own cycle auditing, find things, or a bridge, a failure. They will find things to investigate thoroughly. Federally, we have thousands of auditors general. And
They go by departments.
they go by departments. The military has a bunch, and they, on an aggregate, return $21 to the taxpayers for every dollar invested in the Inspector General's office. If I said Auditor General earlier, I made a mistake. So these federal inspectors general, they produce 21 times the return of what taxpayers invest into them. How anyone with a straight face in the state of Rhode Island could be opposed to that, it baffles me. It's a reluctance to let go of power is what it is. Sure. And the people who have that power right now do not want to let it go, because they may very well be the ones who find themselves being inspected, generally speaking.
So, Leader Dela Cruz, who would control these investigations? You know, is this going to be just a free-floating agent that goes around and decides to stick his or her nose into a state agency or a department? How do you propose controlling that person?
It would have to be. It would absolutely have to be. The individual can't answer again to the Senate President or to the Speaker of the House or to the governor. They have to be independent so that they are free to look at whatever department. And, you know, there may be individuals who are in a department who may, you know, leave a tip for their office, which they can, you know, start to investigate and see if there's any, you know, truth behind it. But if it's not independent, then it's not going to work. You know, it can't. Somebody said to me, "Well, why can't it be the Attorney General's office?" Again, not independent. We need an independent person.
Do you envision that when you? That's a good point, because the question would be: would that person or would that department be able to go into the AG's office and?
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yep.
so the other question is, we assume that the Attorney General is a member of the bar. What would be the qualifications for an Inspector General, Leader?
Inspectors General federally speaking,
Not federally.
but
the way you
general,
envision an IG in the state of Rhode Island, what would the person's qualifications be?
Ideally, they will have a law enforcement background, or they would have served as a prosecutor or someone who investigates in the normal frame of work. Now remember, it's an office of the Inspector General, so you don't need somebody who is a CPA, who is a certified auditor, or any of that, or even a member of the bar. You need somebody who knows how to investigate. They will have a team of auditors, a team of attorneys, and a team of others working with them. That's how it works in Massachusetts. That's how it works in many other states. So it's the right person for the job, and whether or not it's an elected position, an appointed position, all of these things are part of the discussion that has been ongoing. We've slightly altered the bill each year based on the feedback that we receive. You know, in the Senate hearings we get different feedback, in the House we get different feedback, and we're trying to accommodate the various concerns that come up. This person would just have to have a good eye for investigations. Auditors are very special people. They have a knack to find where the issues are. It's just an inherent ability. So an inspector would have to have that same knack. And I think through law enforcement, through military service, through being a prosecutor, they would have gained that. And that would best position them to lead that department.
As a retired CPA, you warmed the cockles of my heart. Senator, do you envision an Inspector General having subpoena powers, in other words, compel the production of documents and the testimony of witnesses?
Absolutely. If they don't have that power, then they don't really have any power, and they have to be able to prosecute. They have to be able to subpoena for information so that they can do their investigation. And then I would also point out that this is not an issue where just Republicans in the state want it, but Democrats want it as well. And we're talking well over 70% of Rhode Islanders want this. And in the Senate, the bill was first introduced by a Democrat, and then years later they just had not submitted it, and then a Republican picked it up. So its idea, its inception started with the Democrat Party, at least in the Senate side. I'm not sure about the House side. So this is a bipartisan issue. When people are asking Rhode Islanders if they want this, overwhelming response is yes, we need this. They know we need it. We know we need it. But unfortunately, the people in power don't want it.
I will share with you and the audience that a few years ago we had a gentleman on this program who was an outgoing Auditor General, and he was going into the private sector. and he provided a bill, a draft of a bill that he thought would be the way to go, which I think I may have provided. I may have sent it during the campaign, I'm not sure. But I discussed that with a former Speaker of the House, and the objection was the fact that this person, this is again a former Speaker, not the present one, said, well, I don't like the idea that I'm only going to get to appoint 3 people to the supervisory board. And, you know, the Senate president gets some and the governor gets some. And, you know, that was like you say, people don't want to give up control.
It's power,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Quickly, we've got a few minutes left. I want to talk about the pallet shelters, which now that winter is almost over, there's going to be a ceremony, I guess, tomorrow, much fanfare. Perhaps a few flakes will fall. But they're going to open these temporary homeless shelters in Providence, correct? Tomorrow, I believe?
That's on the calendar, yeah.
So I think the fact that this is happening is due, in my understanding, to the fact that House Speaker Joe Shekarchi pushed through legislation that provides for a municipality to declare a temporary emergency, which would then say, okay, these are going to be temporary, so the certain things like aspects of the state fire code, which are enacted after the nation's the fire that we had, tragic fire. The cost for constructing these little cubby holes, I call them, seems to be kind of high. And I think probably anything the government does is expensive because you have to pay union labor or prevailing wages. I'm going to ask each of you to comment on this whole situation. Sure. Representative, why don't we start with you?
Well, we gave a pile of money to an organization that is dealing with homelessness, and that is supposed to be their area of expertise. And for over a year, these structures have been under construction, and the price we allocated, I think it was $3.1 million, is now up to $4.6 million. There are 45 structures in which people will live, and then there are, I think, 9 additional buildings that are community rooms, some bathrooms, things of that nature. That's an average cost of $85,000 per structure. And I used this example earlier, and I will continue to because I think it really lays it out. The Amish went down, 60 Amish folks went down to western Pennsylvania after the hurricane, and with $300,000, they built in 48 hours, I'm sorry, they built structures that were far more sound than what we have there, and provided immediate housing for people who were in desperate need of housing. And that wasn't even winter. So now we're going to have a ribbon cutting and pat ourselves on the back for opening up $85,000 ice boxes? Are we out of our collective minds?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I'm smiling because I was just thinking about the military. I mean, we have people living in Conex containers that have been converted into, like a place to sleep, basically. And that's what these are. I'm assuming there's heat in them, but even so, they're very simple, and it seems that it's taken an inordinately long amount of time, which is typical of government projects. Let's be honest, folks.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%.
You know, the pallet shelters, if you look at them, if you take 2 pieces of plywood and maybe a little extra piece of another piece of plywood, that's about as big as they are. So if you can imagine that, it has no bathroom, right? As the leader was saying.
Well, I thought it did. Okay,
No,
so
there's
that's why the
community bathrooms. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, no bathroom, no kitchen. I was talking to a business owner in Rhode Island who said he built cottages on his property so that he could rent them out, and he spent $50,000 on a 1-bedroom cottage, each one that he built. It had its own bedroom, it had its own bathroom, it had its own kitchen, its own heat, although the pallet shelters have their own heat, their own system. But if a private business,
And they're permanent.
permanent structures on a cement slab, he spent just over $50,000, and the state is spending how much on these little cardboard boxes? I'm not going to say cardboard boxes; they're plywood boxes.
Yeah. I heard an advocate for this program on a radio program saying that the $3.5 million also incorporates the cost of administering these things afterwards. So. Well, be that as it may, it's obviously a questionable project to start with, and I guess you know, it's going to be for the good, because some of these people obviously need a place to stay.
For sure, it's for the good. But just one last thing.
Yeah.
Another person had reached out to me and said, Jess, you could buy a trailer.
A camper.
Yeah,
A camper.
that was my next question.
Yeah, I mean,
a double. It doesn't have to be a double wide.
Could be on wheels.
Absolutely.
You know?
It's more than 70 square feet, so and it has a refrigerator and everything.
Yeah.
Which also raises a peculiar question. We all know that there's a big push on to provide affordable housing. And I guess one of my questions, I've asked several people this, I haven't gotten a satisfactory answer. Why are mobile homes that are fixed on a foundation, hooked up to utilities, why are they not included in the definition of affordable housing? Has anybody got any?
Well, from my understanding, and you can correct me, is that the way that they're deeded. So if you have a property that isn't deeded as an affordable home, then when you go to sell it, you can sell it for whatever. But if it's deeded a certain way,
Oh, I see.
then you can only recoup so much.
And there's different dynamics where some of these parks or areas will lease the land, you bring your trailer. Some, the owner will buy the land. And so that further conflates all of these parameters. And Senator Dela Cruz is absolutely right. There has to be a 30-year deed restriction that will only be used for affordable housing. During that period, and oftentimes these are not encumbered with those. There have been various iterations of this bill over the years for far before this big push for affordable housing. I think that any housing that is affordable to live in ought to count, but there should be a measured way of doing it. So some of the proposals I've seen on these manufactured homes, as they're referred to, they seem to be missing the mark. You know, if it has a foundation, if they own the land, it'll count as a half of an affordable unit. Well, what's a half an affordable unit? I mean, it's a full house. Yeah. You got a family of 3 or 4 people living in there. It's either affordable or it's not. I think our approach is wrong, but look at the pallet village. When the Speaker of the House has to go in and pass a bill to waive regulations so that we can open a pallet village, it's an indictment of the fact that we have too many regulations. That's why housing is not affordable in the state of Rhode Island. Yeah. It's simply not affordable to build a house in the state of Rhode Island. So when your salaries and your economy don't support the people who need to buy those houses, and the regulations keep the prices too high, you got a perfect storm. That's where we are right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, the reason I raise it is that I live in North Kingstown, and we have a fair number of whatever you want to call mobile home parks or whatever you want to call them, going back to the Navy days, and they're all trailers, if you want, but they're on foundations. They're attached to the septic system, heating, water. It has electricity, and they're not included, and yet we have this goal of having 10% of the housing has to be, quote, affordable. Well, certainly those are affordable. I guess it's always the devil in the details that, we get into these discussions. Now, during that joint appearance, the two of you were with Gene Valicenti, leader Chippendale. I heard you say that you view in reference to the Rhode Island Bridges security breach, that you regard the consulting firm of Deloitte as incompetent. I think it was the word that you used. I want to make sure that's
I very well may have. I do find them incompetent, so I very well may have used that word, yes.
Okay. You want to explain why?
Certainly. So in 2016, we contracted with them in 2013, and in 2016 the program was set to go live. And for another ribbon cutting opportunity, Governor Raimondo said, flip the switch. And the advisors were saying it's probably not a good idea to flip the switch. She had the switch flipped anyway, and we were thrust into a crisis, a human services crisis. Millions, tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars of Rhode Island taxpayer money was lost, because one of the key elements of this is the eligibility engine, which would determine if a person applying was eligible for these services or these whatever it is, EBT, all of the various things. And because that wasn't working, we would obviously we don't want anyone to be without, so we were making everyone eligible who applied. And you can't go back retroactively and say, well, you know, for those 6 months, you really weren't ineligible, so give us that money back. Can't do that. We were fined by the Centers for Medicaid Services because we were out of compliance with Medicare and Medicaid laws, federally speaking. So we were being sued by the ACLU. The program was a disaster. I sat on the very first oversight hearing and sat through every single meeting on that project. And the third-party monitoring company that we had hired to monitor the work of Deloitte indicted them essentially in their reports.
Who was that company?
I don't recall the name of the company. I could very easily go back to my notes from 2016 and find it. But this was someone that was part of the contract. They had to be there, but they were third-party independent. They pointed to all of the best practices of the industry, which were being ignored by Deloitte. This was built in modules like Legos. Some in India, some in Seattle, some here, some there. They have a different programming approach. They have a different programming approach. None of it worked when they turned it on, and the way that they constructed it is in a manner that you cannot go back and very easily change, modify, improve it, because you would have to be the programmer who wrote it to understand the approach that was taken. Companies today don't do that. I was at a national conference where Deloitte and Rhode Island was the test case for how not to employ technology for your state. And this UHIP project the UHIP Bridges project was the case study on everything that's wrong. And their opinion was that yes, when you have something so novel but so broken, you cannot keep adding on to it. You're just building on a bad foundation. So I maintain that. The governor and I do not see eye to eye, and she says I don't know what I'm talking about. And while there are times when I don't,
Was he at the conference?
no, he wasn't at the conference. This is a real problem. This delivers the human services to our state, and it also gave out what 70%, Senator?
700,000.
700,000 Rhode Islanders private, personal, and medical information is now in the dark web or whatever it's called, and people are now monitoring their credit. These are people who are working every day trying to find an affordable house, trying to go to the hospital, and now they have to monitor their credit and make sure they're not having their identity stolen. It's incompetence. Kick Deloitte out, sue them like we sue everyone else. We're suing the bridge people, we sued 38 students. Sue them, get the money back, and build a better product.
This goes back to, and correct me if I'm wrong, when Governor Chafee cut a deal with the Obama administration when the whole issue of Obamacare, Affordable Care Act came up. The deal was Rhode Island was going to have its own platform. And at that point, it was called Health Source RI.
Still is, yep.
My understanding, going back a ways, obviously, the idea was that Health Source was going to become a gateway portal so that people applying through Health Source would now all of a sudden see the whole palette of state aid that was available, and then would be able to. This is a very ambitious project. So it actually goes back even further to that. And let me share with you a conversation I had with over a luncheon at a meeting I was at with two people that work for DCYF. And they told me, I asked what was wrong, with UHIP and everything. They said, here's the problem. When Deloitte came into DCYF, they were instructed by the Raimondo administration to not talk to the line workers, only talk to the administrators that had been appointed by Raimondo. And they said these people that were coming, the consultants, they weren't allowed to speak to the people actually doing the work.
That came out in the hearings, in the oversight hearings.
Well, there you go. So it's not a surprise or a shock, but my experience, and I was at one point in my checkered career IT director for a Fortune 100 company, is that most of these problems are really laid at the doorstep of management because of the way the job is constructed. It's overambitious, then it's not properly funded, and then the consultants try to respond to that. And I'm not defending Deloitte, but certainly there's a lot of blame to go around. And the other thing that really bothers me, we have a little term, I want to ask this question. I was actually shocked to find out, we got 1 minute, I got to ask this question.
All right.
They're talking about between 600 and 700,000 Rhode Islanders'
That's
information
correct.
is exposed.
Yes.
Are you telling me that maybe 60 to 70% of Rhode Islanders are all receiving some sort of a state handout?
So not everybody is. About a third of Rhode Islanders are. But so as you were talking about Health Source RI, if I go on Health Source RI and I'm looking for the most affordable health care plan, my information is at risk. So there could be college students who were looking for a plan, or a family, of 5 that was looking for a plan, but because they didn't get one at work, so they had to go through this, portal. Their information is at risk as well. So it's not just those receiving SNAP benefits and whatever other state benefits. It's for those who also applied for health care. So that's why the number is so high.
Okay. Because I do recall Governor Raimondo talking about how 300,000 Rhode Islanders receive some form of state aid, and I saw, oh wow, we got 600,000 to 700,000 names out there. Okay, but even at 30%, folks, we have truly become the state of dependency. We're no longer the ocean state, aren't we?
It's about 33, 34%,
yeah,
and it is
pretty incredible.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you again for coming on. It's been a great interview. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this program, and I hope you found it informative and enjoyable.